Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hey, welcome to the Magic in the Room podcast. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province. Good to see you guys. How you doing today?
Hey, doing great, Chris.
Awesome. Well, I am excited today because one, Bob's here. That's always a treat. Hannah, I think, is somewhere about 37,000 feet in the sky right now. So, this is we're excited to be kicking off our series on mindset. So we're really going to spend the next few weeks diving into that and really understanding a little more about it. I know for me, it seems really out there, really ethereal, like this concept of mindset, because I hear people talk about it, but what's it really mean? And I think that's the first thing that I want to explore with you guys is what is mindset?
It's basically just our attitude that we bring with us. I've heard people use the term a worldview. But I think it's just kind of your basic attitude that you bring with you every day.
Yeah, that's good. When I think about mindset, I think about like what we believe about how we navigate this world. And that doesn't really help it be less ethereal, does it, Chris? But if I was going to boil that down and try and make it more actionable, I think mindset is like what I hold to be true about how I get from point A to B in life. And if I really believe that it's possible for me to get to point B, then I'm going to approach it differently. If I believe it's not possible for me to get to B, or that my circumstances really are the only thing that dictate if I can get from point A to point B, then my behavior is going to be different. And so when I think about mindset, I think about just, what do I believe? What do I believe is possible about me and about the world that I live in?
I like that kind of concept of it's kind of my belief system with regards to how I think the world works and how I can navigate, the world or my environment around me.
And for me, I think generally speaking, mindset is an approach. Like, what is my approach to this situation, to life? How do I perceive the inputs that I'm surrounded by? And then with those inputs, how do I go about actioning the next thing? And that's, I get down on approach because it gets me to take a step back and kind of consider the situation before jumping into it. But I think we start to scratch at something there around awareness. So if that's really what mindset is, and we're going to say how we define it is accurate and true, even if we have three different definitions, we're going to ride with each of our own individual understandings of this. And if that's what it is, though, where does it come from? Where does that belief or that approach, where does it originate?
I think there's kind of two camps. You hear a lot of people talk about nature. It's our DNA. It's in our genetics. And then you hear other people refer to that it's nurture. The way in which we're brought up, or the people around us when we're a child, growing up. I kind of like the latest research. I think what they're basically saying is, a lot of our personality traits or our behavioral traits are hardwired. They're in our genetics, they're in our genes. But I think they acknowledge that there's a place for both your DNA and from a nurture perspective. So, depending on who you read, it could be a 70-30 mix. It could be a 60-40. I just think it's a good idea to think of, there are some things that we are born with, but then there's also a lot of room for development and where we take our lives.
Yeah, it seems to me that regardless of what you read around the whole behavioral genetics, and it seems whether it's 60-40, 70-30, it seems more likely that we are genetically predisposed than it to be more likely that we're determined by nurture. Would that be a fair statement? And if that's the case, then how are we supposed to change it? Like, or do we just ride with what we got? What do we do? What do we need to look for?
I like the science in this area, Chris, because they strongly encourage us to kind of explore and identify what our strengths are, which typically I would guess are the things that we're born with, that are comfortable, that come natural to us. But then they also encourage us, to identify, hey, there are some areas where we might have some challenges. And I love the fact that they, the latest thinking is around, we all have derailers. And the key is for a lot of us in a majority of our life, they're blind spots. We are not aware of them. We're not aware of the kind of attitudes or behavior that's derailing our life or our success. And to spend some time and kind of be intentional and really try to focus on what's derailing some of my progress or my performance. So I love that fact of it's a really good balance of learning more about what are my strengths, what do I bring to the table, what are the things that kind of come natural to me, but then also what are my blind spots? What are some of the challenges that I've got to be more aware of in order to kind of stay out of the ditch, if you will, so to speak.
I was just going to say, hearing all of this and knowing that a lot of our behavior is predisposed, and geneticists, if they could get our blood sample and look at the DNA, right, they would be able to say a lot of really spooky things about who we are. That doesn't change our responsibility to be intentional. I think we've also found in the last decade that things like heart disease and predisposition to certain types of cancer are largely genetic. But knowing that and knowing kind of what my predisposition is, like, I should take ownership of that and be intentional with my behavior based on what I learn about myself. And I think when we think about our predispositions for behavior and for maybe even strengths, if we were going to take it that far, right, the more we know about that, the more power we have to be intentional with it, both in leveraging our strengths, but also in being mindful about, what areas of my life really are blind spots, and where am I really going to struggle in adopting a mindset that helps me succeed and help the people around me succeed.
Where do they come from? Obviously, we talked about some of the science of that, some of the conditions of that, and that mindset. That's I guess for me, I think it can come from the same answer to where do your beliefs come from. If beliefs are fueling the approach, it's where do those originate, and what are you consuming? Who are the people you're surrounding yourself by? What are you focusing on? In this whole idea of we value what we focus on and we focus on what we value, and the idea of you become who you surround yourself by, I think all of these things influence mindset. And I really love this exploration of, it can come from a number of places, but if you take the nature plus the nurture plus the current environment, you're probably going to come up with somewhere in that equation is what's fueling the approach. So speak a little bit about why is it important? What does it matter what our mindset is? Like, how does it play out over time?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. I think for me, when I think about our behavior and what drives how we respond or what we say or what we do, the actions we take, I think a lot of that comes from our mindset. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that is reflex. There's not a whole lot of thinking, kind of that system one type of thinking, where you basically just react very quickly without necessarily kind of thinking things through. So I think it's critical because I think our behaviors are informed by our mindset. I mean, you could almost say it's the driver. And I still to this day I catch myself, when reacting in a certain way that I'm kind of like, man, where did that come from? I don't believe that's right. I don't think that's the solution, or I think that's inappropriate for what's going on around me. But it's there. I have to acknowledge that there are some things in our mindset or our attitude or our worldview, whatever word you want to use, that really it's like a reflex. When you hear a certain thing, you react a certain way. So great question. I think it's important because I think our mindsets are the biggest driver of our behaviors and our actions.
Bob, I think that's super insightful. And what it makes me think of with mindset as our kind of primary reflex is almost like a photographer that uses different lenses, right? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the lenses they use in photography, but there's like a polarizer that will pop shadow and light differently. There's color filters that will make the image look completely different. And if I'm a photographer, I'm going to show up to a location or look at a landscape or whatever, and I'm going to see it through the eyes that I was given, right? But a well-trained photographer is going to see it through those eyes that they've been given, and they can imagine and say, well, if I put this filter on, it's going to look different. It's going to make those trees pop out, or it's going to cut down the glare on the river over there, whatever it is. And I think the same goes for us as we approach problems in life, right? We come to it with this reflexive mindset that is ingrained in us from how we grew up, how our first challenges were navigated, and like we've already talked about, a lot of genetic predisposition. But if we practice at it, we should be able to quickly say, oh man, I need a different lens for this situation, right? I've learned that my natural how I see things is not going to create the best solution with the conditions that have been presented to me. So I know I've got to get in my camera bag and pull out a different lens for this, and that's going to help me be successful. And so, I think like all things, Chris, you talked about intentionality, right? It matters. Intentionality drives the difference between folks who are successful and who have a really hard time finding success in the face of adversity. And so the more intentional we can get about what lens we're using for the certain situation with our mindset will matter and will have outcomes.
I know we're all big fans of emotional intelligence, but as you were telling that story about the photographer choosing the lens, to me that made me think of emotional intelligence and being able to kind of consciously decide, okay, which lens, which mindset or behavior or thought process do I need to apply in this situation? That kind of helped me connect some dots there.
Yeah, and I mean, Bob, we saw this morning in a workshop that we were doing. So we we talked about this with a group of leaders that we were coaching up, and they had this whole long conversation around, in what situations do I really mentor the folks that I'm leading? And in what situations do I need to put on my coaching hat and take a coaching approach where I'm just helping them discover what the best way forward is? I think that's a great example of the more skills we add, the more intentional we can get. Also, shout out to situational leadership, right? Lots of folks out there are familiar with that and use that model. When we think about, should I coach? Should I delegate? Should I direct this activity? We can do the same thing as we approach kind of situations in day-to-day life and challenges. How do I approach this? Do I really take a directive approach and lean in there and get aggressive? Do I facilitate my way through this? Do I enable someone else to navigate this challenge? We have all these options available to us if we've added them to that tool bag.
I want to just pull some thread on what you were talking about there, Luke. I've got a few kind of hit words written down as we're going through this episode. Maybe I'm starting to develop more understanding of mindset. Like there's an element of presence to this. How am I in this moment? How am I processing these inputs? And then there's this applied conscious to this idea. When I think about mindset, I just looking at it on spectrum, there's this protective, can be resentful side of fixed mindsets. And then there's this openness, caring, love, respect that's typically associated with growth mindsets. And I just think that when I am resentful, I'm also not present. And when I am coming from a place of care, respect, and love, I am present. And I think it's these concepts that are starting to interplay for me, that if I'm going to have that growth mindset or a healthy mindset coming from that place of care and respect and being in the moment, allows me to ask the questions you were talking about. Should I do this? How do I show up in this moment? But I can't have those other things, right? That lack of conscious and getting emotionally hijacked, that can be a trait. We can be genetically predisposed to going to that amygdala and just going off and being resentful. And, I want to be the person that if Bob's named, National Consultant of the Year or Educator of the Year, and he wins $1 million for that award, I don't want to be the person saying, man, I wish I would have got that award. I think I deserve that. I'm saying there's nobody nobody deserves that more than Bob. I know how he works. I know what he's devoted his life to. And now he gets to take care of his family in a wonderful way. But how many people would go home and be like, that's not fair. He didn't do this. He hasn't sacrificed like I have. He doesn't need the money, whatever, right? Resent, and just lock up. And then how long do they focus on that? And how long is that a distraction from where they should be? When I come from that place of care and respect, I say, that's awesome for Bob. I want to celebrate with him. I want to call and tell him congratulations. And it's a moment and we celebrate and it's over. And I go do the rest of my stuff and I focus on what I'm trying to build. And just it's a different approach. There's less muck in having that healthy mindset. So anyway, that's just me kind of sharing as we're going through this conversation, how some different key words are starting to pop up for me. But thoughts on that, Luke? You typically have thoughts on a diatribe.
Yeah, you can count on me, Chris. So, just thinking through that, and just listening, one, I know that the three of us on this call have all gone through a little bit of that journey, right? We've all at some point realized a lot of my life, I'm really self-centered. And I've, fallen prey to the fundamental attribution error. So I know we've talked about that on the show before, but this idea that if something goes right, it's because I'm awesome and I did it right. And if something goes wrong, it's because of the situation or someone else or whatever, And I think as we've in life realized we fall prey to that and that it's not true, it just opens up this this whole world of possibility where we can question that assumption whenever it pops into our mind. Where, we see Bob, or whoever it is, get that job that we wanted or be rewarded. And yeah, we might start feeling those feelings, but also this kind of warning light, I think over time starts to come on where we're like, what am I assuming here? Like, what did I not see? And like, am I really all that I'm assuming I am? Maybe there's some things that I'm blind to that it really, disqualified me for that. What are those things? How do I focus on how I respond to this instead of what Bob's going to go home and tell to his family and do, right? Like, how do I get better because of this situation? And I don't say all that to say there's not injustice and there's not all these things. There are, right? And we can get angry and upset about them. That's not wrong. But I think at the end of the day, just recognizing that what we really can control is how we respond and what our mindset to the challenge is going to be, just opens this door to like choice and intentionality and the ability to do whatever we do next, whatever that next action is or word is or strategic decision is. Like, we get to choose it on purpose and not because maybe our worst natures dictate it for us.
I think there's mindsets that tend to be high performing, and there's mindsets that are constrained. And depending on what mindset a leader has or what mindset is developed within a team, you're going to get very different levels of performance. But if we're looking to get people aligned or change a mindset, like, is that even possible? And I don't, it's a tough subject, but what do? Do you change it? Do you enhance it? You just make a decision and it's different? Like, what to do now? And maybe, Bob, start with some of the behavioral genetics on it. Like, what are those cats saying about, if 70% predisposed, what next?
I think the key is awareness. Just simply being aware of what my mindset is. And I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but I probably went the first 50 years of my life having no clue what my mindset was and how it was impacting my life, both good and bad. So I think, and I think that's part of our purpose, as a team and as a company, in helping people better understand what their mindset is. And the behavioral genetics folks they're talking, there's room for both as far as being aware of your strengths, but then also being aware of your challenges. And there is a way. We can adapt our mindset. It can evolve. We can enhance it. But I think we got to be really clear with folks. It's probably going to be some of the hardest work or the biggest challenge you've ever taken on. But I also think it's going to be the most rewarding. I really think, by taking quality time to reflect, and that might be working with a coach, that might be, just whatever, journaling, self-reflection. But I think there are some really good tools and techniques to help us gain a better awareness of where we are with regards to our mindset. And I think we got to just realize, whenever you pick something up, you pick it up on one end, you're going to get the other end too. So, there's good, and then there's some challenges associated with our mindset. And I think, Luke, you used the term, and I love what you said earlier about kind of we're all on a developmental journey. And I think a big part of that journey is awareness, just kind of simply taking the time to kind of really kind of understand what drives my behavior. What are the triggers that cause me to react in a certain way. And once we understand those triggers, and to me that kind of ties a little bit back to emotional intelligence, it can be a game changer. And so I guess that's a long-winded answer to, I do think we can, even though that a lot of our mindset, I think, might be hardwired, I still think there's a big chunk of it that we can heavily influence by simply just being aware of and acknowledging that mindset.
My take on awareness is that it's the first step, right? Knowing what's happening with us, knowing what's driving our mindset. And I guess here's why I really believe that. And I guess where I'm going is like, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that people can actually change their mindset, the way they react to challenges and problems. And why I believe that is, I'll just tell a story. Like, let's take this to the extreme. So I spent a long time working with children and adolescents, and some of the training that I did was around, trauma-informed discipline, trauma-informed program development, trauma-informed group development, and team dynamics. And whenever you think about someone who's experienced things that most of us, can never imagine, right? A child who's been extremely neglected or abused, right? Those are the types of things that they've found changes brain structure, actually changes DNA markers that can be transmitted through generations. Trauma and neglect can. And there are techniques to successfully change behavior and successfully give people who are trapped in a reactive, for good reason, like self-preservation reasons, react violently or dramatically to the world around them because they've been in situations where they needed to react dramatically to survive, right? There are successful techniques to help people learn to process the environment around them differently and to be wildly successful. And a lot of those techniques involve starting with just, hey, what's going on right now? What are you feeling? Teaching simple models. Hey, look, here's our brain. Our brain's like a fist. And outside is our thinking brain. And the inside, my thumb inside this fist is like the emotional brain. And right now, you're having big feelings and it's like this is gone, right? It's just this controlling things. So let's breathe. Let's take some time until we can make this fist and have our thinking brain get control of some of those things, right? So not to go too far down in a story and talking about trauma, but the fact that people have done work and created systemic programs to be able to address that with success makes me think that most of the folks listening have a lot of hope in how we can change how we react to and respond to challenge in our lives.
Yeah. And as I take in what you guys are putting out here, I really get this sense that, I don't know that we can just make the decision tonight that our mindset's going to be different tomorrow, but it feels like I can cultivate my mindset. I can cultivate it through coaching or reading or writing, speaking, teaching, reflecting. Those are different ways that I can cultivate it. And if I think about a process, it's if I can create awareness of my natural approach, then I can compare that to what I truly believe should be my approach. Now I intervene on that with some intentionality, and I create maybe a little bit more intentional or a more conscious existence. So that's me just trying to model that out a bit and thinking through it. And I think this is a really rich conversation, and I think we've at least started scratching the surface on what it can mean. I know as we go forward, we're going to talk about growth mindset versus fixed, and we're going to talk about inward versus outward, and really start looking at what are the high performance mindsets for leaders, and why are certain approaches more successful than others. But as we leave today's conversation, any key takeaways or thoughts as we exit here?
And again, I'm going to go back to Luke, your examples of kind of when talking about a developmental journey. And that first step is awareness. And I appreciate you sharing the stories about being able to work with some folks that really had some serious trauma in their lives. I'm like you guys. I think I'm an eternal optimist. But I do know, just kind of my personal journey, I have to literally every day remind myself of, hey, left to my own devices, I'm going to have a very inward mindset. And I think I'm very fortunate because I have had people in my life that were amazing outward focused people with outward mindsets that I really admire. So I feel like I've got some really good role models that I can basically kind of remember and model my behavior after. So I kind of was embarrassed by having an inward mindset. And I think now the more I've learned and read about mindset, it is what it is. And like Luke said earlier, if you can acknowledge it and kind of get it out on the table, and then start to work and to move in a different direction. But I get back to that. It's a journey. And Chris, you often say this about, just it takes courage, to be humble enough to admit that your mindset's perhaps not what it needs to be. But we can, with that courage, we can every day on our developmental journey, we can take a step closer to being more of in my case, having more of an outward mindset.
Yeah, that's really good, Bob. And, when I think about my key takeaways, I think about probably because we're in a very disrupted time, right? We've done episodes on 2020 wrap up and what does 2021 hold and all of that good stuff. But I do think that folks who tend to live life a little bit inward and a little bit fixed, maybe on cruise control, career-wise, relationally with other people, that there's a lot of opportunity when there's disruption to also examine our mindset. And so people who maybe their career has been shaken up or their livelihood is different, while that pain is not good in itself, I just really encourage us to pause for a minute and say, is there a way for me to really embrace a growth mindset through this? What have I put off learning for the last 5 or 10 or 20 years that maybe I don't need to put off learning anymore? And what are the things that maybe I've avoided thinking about myself or about my purpose or about how much I want to invest in my own development, that right now is a good time to change my thinking on that a little bit and think through how do I really outfit myself for a future that probably will be a little bit more turbulent as we figure out what this whole technology and global economy and all of that, it's going to take a couple more decades to really figure out what that looks like. So maybe I ought to lean into this a little bit differently than I have in the past. So, when I think about takeaways, I just want to encourage folks to maybe give that some thought.
All right. Thanks, Luke. That's powerful stuff to walk away with. And, Bob, I appreciate your openness and, these are things that, as you guys know, I have a strong passion for getting this knowledge out there to leaders earlier in their career. I feel like so many times we go so far into our professional lives before like getting exposed to these concepts. And, we've talked about it before, basically for 32 years, I had a bad mindset. And once I stopped worrying about me and I started worrying about other people, like everything fell into place. And so I know the result of altering or cultivating a different mindset. And it requires some difficult choices, but more so like inventories and just work, emotional work, messy work, and the willingness to do some things differently. So really looking forward to digging into the rest of the mindset series with you guys. Thank you so much for everything. For anybody that's listening, this is the work that we do. So if you would like to dig further into your own mindset, or maybe it's developing the mindset of your team or your entire organization, what we like to do is help courageous leaders build that collective conscious and collective approach to better inform the business and just become a lot better at what it is you love to do. So reach out to us on any of our social channels at purposeandperformance.com. Hook up with one of us on LinkedIn. But it is hard work. It's totally possible. And it's amazing the difference it makes in the lives of our leaders and the teams that are out there doing work every day. So until next time on Magic in the Room, have a good day. We'll talk to everybody soon.